In the wake of his loss to Oleksandr Uysk in 2021, Anthony Joshua was fired up about forgetting the sweet science and bringing back his much more aggressive younger self. But talk of having a tear-up with Uysk has dissipated in recent months as the rematch has inched ever closer, replaced with a more neutral stance.
The goal is not defense, the goal is not attack, the goal is just to win.
At the end of the day, he's right. A win is all that matters, and what the history books will reflect and remember. And it is also worth remembering that reclaiming his titles by any means possible puts him in line for a possible shot at the undisputed crown. And even without that though, his legacy would have grown measurably by avenging his loss to Oleksandr Uysk and becoming a 3-time heavyweight champion. So how does he go about that? And while there's been much talk of Joshua being more aggressive, trying to bang Uysk out, be the bully, put it on him, there are inherent risks with that game plan. Chief among them, does he have the gas tank to let his hands go early and often and for several rounds in the hope of catching Uysk? And it's likely a proficient counterpuncher in Uysk would welcome the additional openings a come-forward, more aggressive Anthony Joshua would present. So if a seek and destroy strategy is a risky one, what's left? Well, we've already seen the fight play out in 2021 at Joshua's usually preferred mid-range, with Joshua throwing a lot of jabs, chewing up his energy, and trying to outbox his man. Ultimately, he was caught with many counter shots, and then Uysk raced away with the later rounds as a depleted Joshua ran out of gas. And it is actually one of Joshua's most recent comments about not being well prepared enough in the first fight for the pace that Uysk was fighting at that could be the best indicator of what's to come. We know he can't go shot for shot all 12 rounds, as he will be out of gas after 8 or 9 rounds. Joshua needs to control the pace of the fight better in the rematch, fight it on his terms. The best way he can go about that could be fighting at range. Utilize his height and reach advantages that he has, which is something he didn't use to its full extent in the first fight. That could very well mean we end up seeing an Anthony Joshua fighting more akin to his performance against Andy Ruiz Jr. in 2019, the rematch, where he worked at range, he moved, he engaged more on his terms, and perhaps hoping he'll be able to walk Oleksandr Uysk onto something as he looks to close the distance and get his own work away. And one of the architects of that Ruiz rematch performance in Saudi Arabia in 2019, he is still in Joshua's camp, and that is of course one of his trainers, Angel Fernandez. And right now, they're back in Saudi Arabia, the site of the last rematch, and also where that movement and that win at any cost mentality were last deployed. And you might be thinking, well, why bring in Robert Garcia if they intend to only go back to something that's previously worked? Let's face it, Joshua will need more than a box and move strategy to get it done, as Uysk isn't a flat-footed Andy Ruiz. He does have the ability to close the distance with his fast feet, he can cut the ring off, and he can harass Joshua a lot more than Ruiz could, who basically didn't do much in that rematch in 2019. The inclusion of Garcia is to complement Fernandez, be a foil to his finesse with aggression. Joshua is going to need to be more aggressive to a degree, even when he's working at range, working on the back foot. He needs to dissuade Uysk with his heavy hands, catch him coming in, catch him with more of those straight punches that Uysk has admitted had an impact on him in the first fight. And importantly, a lot of Garcia's fighters do tie up well, and they can work in the clinch. So if Joshua and Uysk tie up, I do expect to see a more aggressive Joshua in those moments, banging to the body, using his weight advantage to lean on his man, rough him up with his forearm, shoulder, whatever he has to do. Basically keep working and not fall victim to the silent agreements we see boxers so often fall into and take a rest. In that first fight, it was an exceptionally clean fight, very little holding, with it being more than 3.5 rounds before we saw a clinch. I expect Anthony Joshua will be a more willing participant to tie up this time around, and perhaps it will be a little Vladimir Klitschko-esque. Get work away, tie up to end an exchange, especially if Usyk is having some success. But whatever range Joshua is working at, he also needs to invest to the body. There were moments in that first fight where he had success to the body, and visibly it slowed Usyk momentarily. So if he wants to take his legs away, which is something which is advisable, the body is available, he's got to target it when he can. It's fair to say that I do expect this again to largely be a tactical affair, especially in those first half a dozen rounds. But Joshua, I think, will attempt to fight more on his terms, use those physical advantages, put them to better use, and we know he can hurt Usyk, something that Usyk has admitted. He can probably knock him out, he's certainly got the power to do so if he lands with more regularity, but execution is going to be key. And just before I go, I would note I did a poll on this fight, and Joshua to win on points only garnered 3% of the 1,400 plus votes. Overall, those who voted, and thank you for doing so, they thought this was a 60-40 fight for Usyk. And deservedly so after Usyk swept those latter rounds the first time around. But in this sport, small changes, smart tactics, it can make all the difference. Joshua can win, but it's not going to be easy. And I agree Usyk deserves to go in the favourite. I expect him to largely do what he normally does. He generally fights largely the same. I don't think there's going to be massive variations in his tactics, but he will react to what's in front of him. And bearing in mind, he will be ready for any game plan that Joshua brings. Very experienced, and he had some very tall timber, mobile big men sparring with him in this camp to prepare for this fight. I can't wait. How about you?